Hey everyone, welcome back to the Earthon Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers Josh and Dan, I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we'll be discussing all things limnological and potamological, because that is the study of rivers and river systems, inland river systems, in reverse order. Sorry about that. So we're going to talk about the last Tiskrang house, House Henghyoke, and then cover up everything we haven't otherwise talked about in the Serpent River sourcebook, and where anything else we might not have missed, not associated with a Tiskrang house. How is that for all-encompassing?
This is going to wrap up our Serpent River series, because our discussion of House Henghyoke is apt to be a little bit on the shorter side, because
not a lot to tell.
There wasn't much about House Ishkarat. There was even less about House Decambris. There is even less about House Henghyoke.
Yeah.
And so we were also talking about, well, what is some other stuff that we could mention? And there's a bunch of locations and stuff that we haven't really covered at all thus far. And this can kind of be an atlas follow-up.
Geography.
Stuff to cover.
Absolutely. So to begin, so if you have any questions for us about what you're about to hear, or anything where you have not, or when you're done, didn't discuss, my brain is fried, people. Sorry about that. Please feel free to drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. House Henghyoke is otherwise known as the House of the Otter, which I find weird because it's a pirate confederation. So an otter is not necessarily like a tough fighting animal. Really, they're kind of cute and do those little human things with their hands. I'm not entirely sure.
Oh, that gets explained.
Go for it, man. Go for it. Hit me.
So it is explained.
Oh, right.
There's two pieces of it. One, House Henghyoke, the raiders of House Henghyoke are frequently seen working alongside giant river otters.
Yes.
That is a thing that they work with. And there is also, and where they got their name is from an old legend of shape-changing river otters. The Henghyoke is the name that others have given them. It is not something that they have assumed for themselves for reasons that we are going to be exploring here as we discuss what little information there is about them.
Yeah, because Henghyoke is the Tiskrang word for giant river otter. So that explains that. But they also bred those otters to ride as mounts in combat. So those otters, so some still exist throughout the jungle that are 5 to 7 foot tall, long, take your pick, gigantic otters. So we don't have any stat blocks for those. Make them up as you go along. It would be fun, though. But yeah, their Gadonia is a platinum torc, T-O-R-C, that they wear around their neck. And I had to look that one up because I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not a jeweler. What is a torc? It's basically a braided metal rope. But this one is designed to look like an otter eating its tail.
It's from Celtic. It's a Celtic word and is commonly associated with some stuff in various old Celtic myths and legends. Frequently, the traditional one is the collar that doesn't completely come all the way around. Like it's got the two nubs on the end, and then like the idea being that it's because it's not a complete circle, that it can be bent a little bit in order to get it on or off. But yeah, it's basically a choker or necklace that kind of fits closely around the neck of the person wearing it. But House Henghyokes are completely enclosed.
Yes. So games should teach us something, and I just learned something. So how's that? But yeah, the otherwise the Gadonia is, their symbol is a river otter with a silver egg in its mouth. So if they're flying a flag, again, looks completely different from everybody else's flags out there. So not hard to spot at a distance, just so you know. Very different from the red wheel, and very different from the silver salmon, all kinds of things. So yes, to Josh's point, House Henghyoke, not a lot is known because the base of operations, no one's found it. They don't have any allies, so there's not a lot of rumors going around. And the Shivalahala is rumored to be an illusionist, high-powered one. No name, just there you go.
And part of the reason, an additional reason that so little is known about them is that they don't talk.
I was going to get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when they attack, They do not cry out. There are no battle shouts. There are no battle noises. There's no cries of pain. There's no discussion among the invaders that are belonging to House Henghyoke. There's no exclamations of surprise. They are essentially mute in every single instance of their lives. They don't flinch under interrogation. Mental attack spells either induce coma or death upon House Henghyoke. They really don't otherwise react to them. And removing the silver torc, it said platinum. Yeah, removing the torc requires a weaponsmith, by the way. Weaponsmith tools and or leaves Henghyoke pirates insane or catatonic.
Yeah. So basically all that is known about them is that these ferocious raiders who do not follow either the rules of the river,
Bakshevas.
Well, the baksheva, but the updated, the compact that.
Oh yeah.
They don't follow that. They also don't follow the traditional baksheva rules.
Mm-mm.
They will attack, take what they want, and destroy what they can't take.
Yes.
Attacking other ships, attacking villages, like sort of appearing out of nowhere and vanishing into nothing just as easily. Hence the rumors that there is powerful illusion magic involved in what is going on with them. But they, similar to House Ishkarat, are new to the river system. There is no record of them existing or anything like that with regards to them being around before the Scourge. They are something that has only shown up in the aftermath, in the recent couple of, century or so since the end of the Scourge.
Mm-hmm. When they do attack anywhere, because they do actually quite frequently attack, they have a reputation as bloodthirsty and rapacious. They are, of course, pirates. Like to Josh's point, they do destroy everything that they can't actually take. And they have cruelty exceeding Theron slavers. So here's my question for Josh. And it's my question. Nobody else's question, because I read emails last episode. Do you think that the torc kind of communicates some kind of a mind control? Because they act like automatons. They're very cruel. So perhaps is there maybe a horror behind House Henghyoke?
Perhaps.
That's all. That's my theory. That's the theory I would be running with.
That is not a bad theory and is an interesting avenue to potentially explore.
It's a thought experiment.
Yeah, there are theories that they might in some way be allied with Thera, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because they attack Thera as willingly as they attack anybody else.
Yeah, equal ferocity.
There does not appear to be anybody that is ultimately safe from their depredations. I know what the intent ended up being for them. And it is barring something else showing up.
Fair.
It is the idea under which I continue to approach them.
You can tell me offline. The listeners of the show know.
This is one of those that is a sort of setting big secret, and I will only say that all of the clues are there to figure it out. They're just scattered across a bunch of different places.
So a really big mystery.
And I don't know whether the answer, I don't know that whatever was revealed sort of towards the end of the first edition run, whether that was something that was decided when this book was written, or whether it was another case of we've left some dangling threads and later on went, ooh, this is really cool, and connected it up.
Fair.
But yeah, actually, there are major clues in a couple of places that should allow people to at least make a pretty good guess as to what is going on with regards to House Henghyoke.
Which is absolutely fair, because I know for a fact I have not read all of the first edition books yet. Or if I have, my memory sucks so bad I haven't remembered anything in the last 20 years.
This is one that I do not want to spoil here in the show, because...
Nor shall we.
It's awesome in one sense, and I would like to kind of keep that secret until it is worth revealing.
Well,
this is something that could potentially come into play in future story development
and products
for Earth Dawn and product, and so I don't want to spoil that.
No.
Because it could be handy in the future.
Absolutely so.
Keep that in the back pocket. But I will tell you, I'll tell you after we press stop.
That's fine. Absolutely fine. Literally, that is everything I could find about House Henghyoke in the Serpent River source book and or the compendium from the Nations of Barsaive Volume 1 from Red Brick as the collection of everything. That took us about 11 minutes to get through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, if you got any questions for us on that one, see you next time. I'm just kidding. We will now get to the limnological part of the episode where we're going to talk about the study of the inland river systems, because that is literally limnology is the study of inland river systems. And so we're going to cover the rest of the Serpent River as much as we can find in all the books, starting kind of north and working our way down through the eastern crescent on down south. So the northern reach is the more dangerous stretch of the Serpent River. This is where you find between Iopos and Bloodwood and all that stuff up north. Points of interest, Glenwood Deep. We didn't really talk about them a whole lot.
Yeah, we talked about them a little bit when we were talking about House Ishkarat, because Glenwood Deep is kind of the only place in northwestern Barsaive that is not allied with Iopos in some capacity. There has not been a lot of information revealed about Glenwood Deep. There's not a lot of information sort of in the books about it, except that it does have sort of the highest population concentration of windlings in Barsaive.
Yeah, 30-odd tribes.
Yeah, and that the windlings of Glenwood Deep, because of the traditional windling feelings on freedom and that sort of thing, do not get along with the Denairastas and Iopos and the expansionist and control that they are trying to exert, not only up in that region, but Barsaive in general. And so Glenwood Deep acts as a kind of Sherwood Forest type place where those who are fighting against Denairastas control in northwestern Barsaive operate out of.
Yeah.
Supported by the windlings of Glenwood Deep and the magic that they have to kind of control their territory and terrain in a similar way that the elves would, but differently.
Fair. Absolutely fair. This northern reach, like I said, between Iopos and Lake Vors, all the way into Caer Eidolon, further on eastward. So this is the whole northern reach. These waterways here through the Scol Mountains have cliffs kind of as the riverbanks. So it's like almost like going through the Grand Canyon, essentially. They're really tall cliffs. Maybe not a mile high, but really tall. The river narrows, also deepens, and the Scol Mountains are home to troll moots that raid, but don't have airships. They only raid via thunder beasts. So, little points of interest.
I mean, thunder beasts, yes, but also, as got explained a little bit later, the primary moot in the Scol Mountains are the Firescales, who ride a beast very similar to the thunder beast, called the Firescale, I think is what it's called. That they take their moot name from that creature. But they are also, to a certain extent, allied, or at least work somehow with the Denairastas. We also know that, in addition to the trolls, there are quite a number of dragonkin that operate out of those mountains as well.
Yeah.
Wyverns and those sorts of things are also rather numerous up there. Empty Thrones revealed that the Outcast has a lair in the Scol Mountains, which makes sense because it is close to Iopos, where his children are. So it's a pretty dangerous area. And Glenwood Deep is kind of nestled up against the southern slopes of it, making things even more interesting for the folks living there.
Define interesting. Oh God!
Ripe
God,
opportunities. Ripe opportunities for adventure.
Yes.
But because of the narrowing of the river and the deepening of it, the river runs faster, is more likely to have rapids and turbulence. You're probably not going to necessarily run into the rapids so much, because if the water is deeper, then you're not going to have necessarily the rocks that are coming up to the surface that are going to cause sort of traditional rapids. But a fast river can still be a dangerous river. And the narrowing of the river means that it is a little bit harder to avoid the attention of the Ishkarat, who quite heavily patrol that stretch of the water. You do end up getting some rapids and so forth once you get up beyond Iopos. Nobody has ever really gotten to the headwaters of the Serpent. Things get too turbulent and dangerous to take riverboats too much further upstream than you can get from Iopos.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's, I mean, we talked about, what is it? Lake Vors is the
Correct.
lake that House Ishkarat's base of operations is located in.
Exactly.
Which they took from House Sirtis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the river widens out enough at that point to maybe give a little bit more opportunity. But it's still, with what's going on with the Denairastas and House Ishkarat and all of that stuff, you know, we talked about the North Reach quite a bit when we were talking about House Ishkarat. And there's not a lot up there beyond Glenwood Deep that is friendly or interesting in some capacity.
Yeah, so between just House Ishkarat and Iopos and what they're trying to do up there, that's, like I said, the more dangerous stretch of Serpent River, more or less. Heading a little eastward, we get the Lesser Mothingale and the Greater Mothingale River running through and around Bloodwood, which kind of meets up with the Serpent at Caer Idolon. And the Mothingale River basically is heading south. It goes through steppes and some withered highlands and so forth and so on, but it's, you know, mostly from the Bloodwood, so...
Yeah, I mean, all of that, those sort of two primary waterways that travel through Bloodwood and are used by the elves to travel somewhat within their territory, they feed together into, you know, a single outflow, and all of the sort of creeks and streams and whatnot that kind of flow down from the north through Bloodwood all kind of feed into the Mothingale River that empties into the Serpent there.
Yeah.
It is the most common access point for people who are entering into the wood legitimately, but it is also the point where a lot of smuggling and gray market trade between people who are trying to trade goods with the elves. And we talked about how Alakia kind of is obviously is almost certainly aware of it, but lets it happen as long as it isn't disrupting things too much in terms of challenging her rule.
Absolutely.
You know, that being the one real access for the elves of the wood to trade with the rest of Barsaive, to what limited amount that they do trade, is ultimately what led to them making that deal with House Sirtis to stop Ishkarat expansionism beyond Lake Vors, because if the Ishkarat control Eidolon and the elves' access to the river, that's troublesome. That's difficult.
A little bit.
For the elves in terms of what goes on. I don't think Alakia would like it that much.
Fair enough. So we are going to keep heading east a little bit here, because this does kind of make a large crescent. So as we pass through the Throal Mountains and we get to the Midreach begins just south of the foothills of the Throal Mountains, basically where House Sirtis, I think, begins, their base of operations is. This actually is some interesting land around the river itself. There are vineyards here, farmlands here, and pastures of livestock. So we're getting more into, air quotes, civilization along the river here. There are two towns of note. One is Tansiarda, which is doing an engineering marvel, trying to build a bridge over the Serpent River, the first one.
This is downstream of House Sirtis, but the stretch of river from a little bit beyond Eidolon, where it starts entering into that sort of valley, for lack of a better term, between the Throal Mountains and the Caucavic Mountains. Like it's a whole bunch of smaller streams and rivers and tributaries all kind of feed into the Serpent, getting to that point, coming in from rivers in the sort of northern side of the Throal Mountains and the Caucavic Mountains.
And that's where the Lilai Gorge is, just north of Sirtis.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
so.
Is just, just kind of through there. But that stretch, once you get beyond the gorge, I remember I talked about how I had set my first campaign setting in Earth Dawn was in that area because of the river and whatnot. There would probably be a pretty rich farmland if somewhat limited in space and maybe perhaps rocky a little bit or whatever. But that could be interesting. But yeah, then you get to Tansiarda where some dwarves are trying to build a bridge across the river, which would be quite the feat. Considering size-wise how the Serpent River is...
It's as wide as the Mississippi. It's like a mile.
Well, yeah. I was just Googling. It looks like perhaps at least... Looks like the earliest bridge, at least according to Google, the earliest bridge to be opened that actually crossed the Mississippi River is 1874. The Eads Bridge, crosses the river at St. Louis.
They're coming up on 150 years now.
Between St. Louis, Missouri, and East St. Louis, Illinois. So it was a major engineering feat at the time and is the oldest still extant bridge on the Mississippi River system. And considering everything, whether the dwarves will be able to successfully bridge the Serpent and thereby have a way of getting around some of the Tiskrang control of the river would be pretty notable.
Yeah. I'm looking at the actual map out of the book itself, and I love the fact that there's kind of a Y formation there with the Aladar River coming in and this little branch coming up just south of, or just east of the Caucavic Mountains, and then there's Tansiarda. I'm like, I really would be able to see or envision the dwarves doing like a 3-way triangular shaped bridge. I think that would be... That's what I have in my head, but that's just me.
Let's try and get one side done before we try and
do all three.
Do the others.
Exactly. So
that would basically connect what is sort of the Throlic basin, on the southwestern side of the Throal Mountains where Bartertown and the entrance to the Kingdom of Throal is, and all of the plains and hinterlands off to western Barsaive, to eastern Barsaive, par length, and all of the lands kind of on the other side of the river there.
Yeah.
Because the river more effectively in some respects cuts the province in half. Mm-hmm. Not quite in half, but cuts off western Barsaive from the eastern third of things. And that eastern third, admittedly, is not as populated as central Barsaive, but still having that access without needing to rely on ferries and whatnot to get you across.
Yeah.
I can understand why they are trying to do it.
Absolutely.
There's no good place to do it, I think, north or upstream of the gorge, because at that point you're getting too close to Ishkarat territory.
Yep. And
if you get too much further downstream, the river gets even wider, and crossing it is an even bigger obstacle.
Oh, yeah.
So, they've probably chosen the best place that they could conceivably do it, but it is going to be a very long...
Well, it's going to work kind of like the Panama Canal, just in reverse. So instead of making a bridge, instead of making a canal through land, you're making a bridge over water. So it's the same idea.
But they would also need to make the bridge tall enough that riverboats could pass under it.
Yep. And sturdy enough to handle
traffic
of all kinds.
Hey, there's a lot of political interest that I'm sure would be focused on what's going on there and the progress of the project. I think, at least according to the Serpent River book, there's not really been anything done yet except some of the initial pilings.
Yeah.
On the side, they haven't even started going out into the river proper yet.
Yeah, they haven't quarried much of the stone. They haven't done, as far as I can tell, done any surveying for where anything should be other than, we think this is a good spot. That's about it. And that's the last we've heard from them. So we'll check it in a couple of years when we advance the timeline again. Kidding. Just south of that, almost directly due south of that, is another town of note, Denlakian. This is one of the finer shipyards in all of Barsaive. So this is where the ships are being built. They have primary manufacturing of the fire engines, but the This is also the part of the mid-reach here where Highland raiders from the Throal Mountains and the Caucavic Mountains love to drop in, we'll say.
Yeah. Does it say in the book, I was trying to look it up, but I'll just ask you because you were doing notes and research. Does it say that it's actually affiliated or is it an independent community?
I want to say it's independent because it doesn't ring a bell that they were affiliated. It
does mention that the hero Shen Dinlikian was chief engineer and advisor to the Sirtesian Nials during the war against the elves. It may be a case where they may have been more closely allied with House Sirtis, even perhaps been a member community prior to the Scourge, but because of what's been happening with House Sirtis in the aftermath and so forth, they might be sort of independent.
Yeah, that rings a bit. Best I got. My brain is turned to mush, as I said. On down past all this. Now, this is what we've covered before. We've covered Lake Ban. We've covered the Quail River. We've covered the Serpent River down here under Lake Pyros, Lake Contention. This is all uncontested territory. Well, that's not really accurate thing to say there. So it's all contested territory, or at least delineated territory. But this is where we get to kind of discover the Servos River itself and the Servos jungle. Lake Pyros actually means flame. There is some phosphorescent algae in this lake kind of at the bottom, so this can get mined or at least used. But the lake itself is 55 miles long and 25 miles wide at its biggest part there. And it was settled by post-Scourge settlers were mostly elves. And so this is where the Seekers of the Heart kind of started, which I know is weird because it's miles and miles and miles away from the Bloodwood, but that's a different tale.
Yeah, there's a little bit of tweaking or clarification. I am forgetting now with regards to the Seekers of the Heart.
You and me both.
Because there might have been some stuff that was brought up in the Elven Nations book with regards to them in terms of the actual origin of the Buyer sisters. And it might be that they actually kind of started things down there, but they are not, I don't seem to recall, from that particular area themselves. But because of it being a place where a lot of elves settled after the Scourge, it would seem to be a logical place where if you were starting a group to work against the corruption of the Bloodwood and whatnot, that would be a good place to start.
Absolutely. So Servos means isolated when you translate it. A lot of Tiskrang village towers still dot the shores of Lake Pyros. They're all abandoned. That's just some scenery for your brain to kind of work on
ruins to dive into.
Absolutely.
Looking for key knowledge for magic items or other explorations or stuff like that you might be doing.
Yeah.
Especially if you've got a strong Tiskrang focus game. A lot of ruined towers and villages in that area that could be of interest to people for various reasons.
Absolutely. So what you can find if you travel the Servos River all the way north, because it's just where it ends basically a few days walking, like 4 days walking from Caer Idolon. That's how far north the Servos River goes.
Yeah, the Servos pretty much dominates central Barsaive.
Yes, absolutely. The amount of flora and fauna you can find in this jungle is a list, and I will go through the list. Birds, apes, monkeys, gorillas, deer, gazelle, water buffalo, elephants, crocodiles, hadrosaurs, behemoths, crowgen, wyverns, blood bats, giant spiders, death moths, inchalata, and velos, which are giant Tiskrang. Literally like 3 times the size of an ordinary Tiskrang. Predatory giant Tiskrang.
Yes.
So if that ain't enough for you to throw at your players, you ain't trying hard enough. Just kidding. But there are also crops grown all over the Serpent because it is very fertile ground because, again, jungle. Rice, beans, vegetables, bananas, coconuts, corn, cotton, sugarcane, flax, and tea leaves.
If you are looking for inspiration for stuff with regards to the Servos jungle and the Servos River network, there's a couple of different places that you can draw inspiration. First and foremost, I would think would be the Amazon basin, the Amazon jungle, and the incredible diversity of wildlife, plant and animal that is available there. You might also take some inspiration from the jungles of Southeast Asia.
Yes.
Is another area. The elephants that are found in the Servos jungle are probably more of the Asian elephant variety. That is the sort of smaller ones.
Yeah.
Because they're, if that's where they are. Maybe take a little bit of inspiration from the rainforests of equatorial Africa a little bit. But those are like the places that you might want to look at for inspiration. But, you definitely could not go wrong with mixing inspirations of the Amazon with also some of the South American ancient indigenous nations that were there in terms of like combining those kind of ruins and ideas having been swallowed up by the jungle. The Velos are not clear whether they're actually name givers, similar to like ogres and other things like that. They don't appear to have any language, but they are very large and very nasty and very predatory. I think they're awesome. The Servos jungle is also home to numerous sort of independent tribes of Tiskrang, living in a more traditional, older style of Tiskrang, like the way that they lived back in the days before the invention of the fire engine and the sort of development of the Aropagoi and so forth. It is also home to the human Cathan tribesmen, who are given quite a bit of a write-up in Name Givers of Earth Dawn Volume 1, also reprinted in Name Givers of Barsaive for 3rd edition. An interesting community of humans who survived the Scourge without the rights of protection. They had their own sort of oral traditions somehow that let them know what was going on and kind of survived with their own methods and their shamans and magical practitioners kind of protecting them. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of brought up, at least tangentially, in the Travar sourcebook. There's a lot of connection between the plantations and agricultural communities of the southern Servos jungle in particular, connected to merchant houses in Travar. The flowers that are provided for the festival every year are all harvested and grown in the Servos jungle. There's a lot that could potentially, if you want to have a story go along that route, could kind of parallel in some ways the struggles that are going on in the Amazon basin with some of the indigenous tribes there and the difficulties that they're facing with encroachment into their traditional territory and the cutting down of the rainforest for agriculture and industry and things like that.
Yeah.
You could draw some inspiration from things like that, where the long dwelling there Cathan and Tiskrang tribes of those areas running into difficulties, especially with House Catention, who has essentially control of the Servos River network because it is a tributary and is in the South Reach. There is quite a bit that House Catention has in that area in terms of interest and influence and control. And while I suspect that their control does not extend super deep into the Servos River network, there's a lot of stuff there, ruins of previous settlements and cities and so forth that are just lost and swallowed up by the jungle. Classic Indiana Jones style ruin diving and stuff that can be discovered and recovered there.
Zinj.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of really cool stuff that you could potentially draw for inspiration. And from this kind of classic pulp exploration of ruins and lost civilizations to the kind of political struggles that you might have with sort of more capitalist, expansionist, business-oriented interests encroaching on the territory of more traditional tribes and indigenous folk and that kind of thing.
Yeah, your David and Goliath type struggle.
Potentially, yeah.
Along there as well is the Galanga River with Griffin Falls, just as a little point of interest for geography speaking. We covered a little bit of the Tylon River and Kratos along the Tylon Mountains there. So approaching the Mist Swamps, we're now heading, way far west again, because again, this makes a big
kind of backwards sea.
Yeah, a little bit. There are loads of abandoned cares and abandoned mine shafts along this stretch of the river, because this is where a lot of places popped up right after the Scourge and didn't survive. There's 2 towns before you get to the swamps themselves. Portage and Trosk. Any memories of those?
Portage is sort of the last community that you have on the Serpent. It's not actually the last, but it's really kind of the last. It's a town that's sort of there near where the Byros River comes up and where the Tylan River as well comes down. It's kind of a community that has sprung up in that vicinity because it's kind of a crossroads of trade between those rivers. It's not a huge community, but it is one that has sort of established itself there because of its location.
Mm-hmm.
Trosk is a community that is set up essentially inside the technical border of the Badlands. It's a community that was sort of the base of operations for a number of questors of Jasperi and their associated folk who are trying to find out what is going on with the Badlands and stop its expansion or potentially reverse it or that sort of thing. So it is a potential launching point for expeditions into the Badlands that are, for whatever reason, not leaving Travar. And once you get past Trosk, there's basically nothing but ruins and abandoned cares and
mine shafts.
Yeah, and whatnot. And then you hit the swamps. Which Aban is not going to... we talked about the Mist Swamps quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Go back to the episode where we talked about Aban.
Well, and then just if you're on a boat in river trying to get through the Mist Swamps, it is sludge, essentially.
Yeah.
If you have a keel on that boat, it's going to get stuck. If you are in a flat bottom boat, you're not going to be able to see anything because the visibility is like 2 to 3 feet in front of you. So good luck navigating that on the water because the current stops, essentially.
It's a swamp.
Yeah. It's still water. So there's reeds and trees and all kinds of things. And then there's the fog and good luck with, navigating anything in any kind of a vessel. So that's when you get out, wade about, thigh deep into the muck and mud. So, mobility is limited.
Yeah, it is not a pleasant place and is the lair of and domain of the great dragon Aban. And also apparently the Castle of Assassins from the Hand of Corruption is located somewhere within its misty depths as well.
Spoiler alert.
We talked about them back with the Secret Societies episodes where we talked about the Hand of Corruption.
Yes.
And then at that point, the river feeds into
the Scarlet Sea.
The Scarlet Sea, and
which feeds into the Death Sea
after. Yeah. Which is part of why sort of the Mist Swamps are the way that they are, and the closer you get to the Scarlet Sea, the more humid and hot and uncomfortable everything becomes.
Yes. So that's the river. We've got the Coil River, which kind of takes down from Lake Ban southeast into the Eris Sea. We're going to skip over Yorupa, intentionally so, because there's eventually going to be a source book about that. We'll talk about Yorupa when the source book comes out. So we're going to intentionally skip over Yorupa. However, the Eris coast along the entire Eris Sea is largely uninhabited, but there are a couple of things I want to point out. There is Cair Otosk, which is 300 miles south of Yorupa, and this is where you find Eris Nehem. The cliffside Cair contains the abyss of Eris Nehem, which is the rift that houses, possibly, the horror Ristool.
That is the Cair from which the trolls that were the founding trolls of Yorupa came from there. The founding of Yorupa is sort of in some ways dated from the arrival of the trolls of Otosk at the site that eventually became Yorupa.
Yeah.
Because they sort of met the dwarves that were living there, and the Tiskrang as well, all kind of got together for mutual defense, and also had human and elf and orc communities as well that all came in as part of that. And the Obsidimen actually as well, the Obsidimen community in Yorupa also comes from that.
Mm-hmm.
The Nehem sector takes its name from Aras Nehem.
Yeah.
And there are some mysteries involved with regards to them and what the deal is. That is a notable place and may perhaps see a little bit more exploration from a adventure hook potential when we get to the Yoruba book. It is definitely something that I think is cool. We'll be talking about that again probably in a few weeks when we get to talking about horrors, some of the named horrors in depth, because it factors pretty strongly into that one.
Absolutely so.
Yeah, so there's that. There's not a whole lot else. There are some islands off the coast of the Aras Sea. The ones that are inhabited tend to be inhabited by horror cults or other fallen communities like cave trolls or other varieties of folk who were scarred or damaged by the scourge in some capacity. You maybe want to avoid getting into kind of the worst stereotypes of cannibal island dwellers. But that is the kind of mood that you could have with some of the communities there. It is kind of, I don't want to say barren, but kind of isolated and unsettled and raw in some regards.
Yeah.
With Yoruba being the primary settlement there, and maybe a couple of villages here and there. But on the coast of the Aras itself, there's not a whole lot. There's at least one community in the southern Coil River that I don't think we talked about, and that's Axelolale.
Right, did not.
Yeah. It's a combination Tiskrang and Windling village.
Oh, that'll be a fun time.
It's called the Swinging City of Axelolale. It's built entirely on platforms suspended in a grove of massive trees that grow at the site. The Tiskrang residents who built the town with the aid of a Windling clan use rope swings to move from platform to platform. Basically, think of like the Ewok village.
Oh, yeah.
From Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
But populated with Tiskrang and Windlings instead of little furry teddy bears.
Yeah. Yeah, I can picture that.
There is also an effort underway as a sort of cooperative effort between House Vestrumen, the Kingdom of Throal, and one of the Covenants of House Sirtis to build amphitheaters along the Coil River.
Right.
And basically to sort of offer those as places for the showboats that we talked about to like stop and give performances and things like that. All of them sort of to be modeled a little bit after the Allcroft Amphitheater in Yoruba.
Yeah.
Whether such things will end up turning a profit or whether it is worth putting that much effort into several infrastructure projects like that in an area that, broadly speaking, is not hugely populated is kind of questionable. But
we'll see what happens.
Again, like stuff that's being worked on the shores of the river, plenty of opportunity for freelance adventurers to get hired to sort out troubles from marauding bandits or wild animals or dracoforms or any of that kind of great stuff. And of course, because you've got multiple nations involved in this, there's bound to be political bickering and whatnot going on as well.
And money changing hands. So we have two last things to talk about, and Josh doesn't know I'm going to spring the last one on him, but the pilgrimage route is basically following one part of the river from Iodia to the cliff city itself. It passes close to the several places warped or corrupted by the horrors during the Scourge. It is roughly a 15-day walk, and the word Iodia means spirit chair.
Yes, that comes from a legend about the Old Man of the Nets, who is kind of the Tiskrang culture hero, in a sense, particularly House Vestrumen, but the Tiskrang broadly. He is sort of like one of the earliest Tiskrang, and there are multiple stories and legends about him. One of them is prominently featured in the Serpent River book, talking about how the floating city came to be.
Yes.
When he was dying, the Old Man of the Nets asked his children to take him to the top of Iodia and to cremate him. And while his body was burned, the chair that they carried him up in was not.
Yes.
And is supposedly a relic or item of some magical import.
And so his family carried the chair back down, and they leave it open for like holiday gatherings. And once a year, his spirit shows up, sits in the chair, and discusses wisdom and hands out advice and things like that. So the Tiskrang culture pretty much leaves an empty chair at large gatherings just in case a deceased spirit wants to show back up again.
It resembles in some respects, and apologies to anybody, to any of my Jewish friends, that I get this wrong, but there's a similar tradition. I think it's at Passover. I think it's in the Passover Seder that traditionally an empty seat is left for. And again, this is a vague thing that I have recollections of.
Fair.
I could be wrong about what it is, but that there's like a seat that is left open for Elijah or something like that. But it's a similar kind of idea that you leave a seat. I think there are probably some other traditions that do something similar as well, where you leave a seat empty at these sort of important festivals as a place for the ancestors or in memory of people who have gone before or that kind of thing. So
what Josh does not know I'm going to spring on him is there's a whole river system on the west side out of the Liège jungle, which does not connect in any way to the Serpent River system. And there's
so we're not going to talk about it.
Well, I was just going to ask. My whole question was, we got a few minutes. What are your thoughts on that system? As in, would there be anything to add about possible developed rivercraft? No scurrying houses, obviously, but
yeah. The problem with that is that the Liège River and the river coming out of the Liège jungle, because the Liège jungle is Usun's territory.
Yes.
And the only name givers that operate in that area are the Tamers, who are remarkably primitive.
Yes.
They basically live under the shadow of a great dragon and survive through their wits and ability to live in such an incredibly dangerous environment. As dangerous as the Servos is,
yes,
the Liège jungle is actually in its own way even more dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
The river comes down and it ends up feeding into, I'm just trying to mentally recall the map. I think it ends up feeding down into, the river network that borders Carafad and Landis.
Yeah.
And feeds into Death Sea down there.
Yes. Out of the Delaris Mountains as well, so.
Yeah, out of the Delaris Mountains and whatnot.
Peaks.
Not a lot that comes out of the Twilight Peaks because of all the volcanic activity, but it feeds into that same thing. Obviously, in Carafad and Landis, especially before the Scourge, there was quite a bit of traffic and activity that would have been taking place on those rivers, but they are a lot less strategically placed and cover a lot less area, so they are not as valuable as the Serpent River is, broadly speaking.
Fair.
And also a good chunk of that territory is also, certainly at, in earlier timeline periods, is very close to Theron territory.
Yeah.
It has a lot of Theron influence and stuff that's going on with Vivane and Skypoint nearby.
Yeah.
For more information on kind of what's going on with that area, you'd probably want to look at the old Vivane book.
Fair.
I seem to recall that when we were talking about Empty Thrones and having the community that's there, that's the focus of one of the chapters of Empty Thrones, there was some discussion with regards to the Tiskrang communities of that area, because there are Tiskrang that live on those rivers, but I don't think they would have much in the way of the riverboat culture that you would find in the Serpent.
Fair.
Just because there is not the resources and the rivers themselves are not as deep and wide as they are
in the Serpent.
Yeah. And so while the Tiskrang probably do use sailboats and other watercraft canoes and barges and things like that,
fire engine,
you probably don't have any traditional riverboats, or very few of them, and they are probably smaller or maybe older ones, simply because of the Death Sea, there is no way for riverboats to get from the Serpent to that other river network.
No. I was just thinking that two storylines popped in my head as possibilities for Game Masters to run with. So tell me your thoughts. Somewhere along the line, Carafad is going to probably want to increase its visibility and or its resources and maybe create, I can see a whole boatload, literally, of orc boatmen branching out from Carafad, beginning to work those waterways, eventually in the future, not necessarily right away. And secondly, I could see maybe some people fed up with the houses of the Serpent River, some Tiskrang migrating westward, westward expansion, and maybe setting up shipbuilding on the Liège system as well to kind of stake their own claim. I have those two thoughts.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I think either of those are potentially useful. I think with regards to the Carafad situation, there is already sort of communities along the Greenheart River, I think is the name of it, on that southern border of Carafod, where there are communities that do fishing and pull resources from the rivers there, both to Scrang and a lot of orcs, of course.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where a Covenant of Tiskrang transplants would be able to put
set up a shop. I'm not sure.
a settlement or a shipyard, because once you get sort of north of the pass between the Dolaris and Twilight Peaks, south of that pass, you're in Carafod.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the orcs would be willing to have the Tiskrang set up something in their territory in that regard.
Or
and north of that, you're close to Ustrecht. You've got the ash blow from the wastes coming in.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the Liage jungle. You don't want to get too close to that.
Yep.
I'm just trying to think of where they would set up shop to do that. I think you would end up with something that would be a lot further south, like in the Vivane area, if they were looking to do something like that. And again, the question is,
plying.
Are the conditions right to have riverboats in the first place?
Yeah.
But also, is there enough population and trade and so forth going on there to make that a risk worth taking?
Fair enough. Like I said, interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is an interesting thought experiment.
Self-enclosed river system.
And I may file that away if down the road my objective of a revised Vivane book ever happens. Mm-hmm. That might be something to have as a possible exploration.
Then my seed was planted. Let's see what grows from that. So, my job here is
get back to me in a few years.
With your free time and your free money. Yeah, I know. You know, your air quotes spare time and free money.
Well, I've got to finish Europa first.
I understand. I completely understand. Since that ties into what we were talking about today, yes, we're skipping Europa on purpose, not just for time constraints, but we'll let any cats out of any bags. So we are otherwise good. So, folks, if you have any questions for us about anything you heard, or if you want to point out something we did not talk about, because we think we covered almost all of it, for any other things of note along the Serpent River system and or the Servos jungle, by all means, drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Any final thoughts, Josh?
No.
We covered a lot of water.
A lot of water under the bridge from this one.
We tread the path, yes.
No, the Serpent River is, as I've said, I'm sure, multiple times during the course of this series, so important to Barsaive as a whole. And the culture, and I mean, the Serpent River in one sense is the lifeblood of Barsaive.
Yes.
And so much of the population of Barsaive relies on the Serpent River network to a greater or lesser extent simply to exist. And the Tiskrang are amazing and probably one of the most interesting original fantasy cultures that has been created, at least from my experience.
I agree.
Any kind of game that is going to be doing travel in Barsaive is going to have to deal with the Serpent River in some capacity.
Oh, yeah.
And knowing what is going on with it allows you to do side quests or to have games that revolve around those conflicts. And there's just a lot of potential there that is really, really cool. And I've really enjoyed this series, going back and looking at this book, this really good book from early in the first edition.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, all of the seeds and hooks and ideas that are there that are still all perfectly valid for a game, even that you might be running in the present day of Earthdawn.
Yeah. I'm
so just wonderful.
Love it all. So until next time, folks, it's time for you to go ride the river for your legend.
Good night, everybody.